So the day I was to be the keynote speaker for a leadership summit in Vancouver, I got a text from a coach from the university hosting the event asking if I had time to meet him for lunch. Now, I love meeting up with coaches, but this was the morning after a long day's travel that I didn't arrive until around midnight. I went across 8 different time zones, and so I'm exhausted and I need to recover to be ready for the next day. But when I realized who the coach was, a 5-time national championship soccer coach, I knew it was a lunch I would not want to miss out on. Here was the opportunity to sit down with a leader who had a lot of success and I could learn from them. And I love these types of conversations. Obviously, as you know, I have this podcast to have lots of them. Except at lunch, I didn't get to ask all the questions I had for this coach. Right? The coach was asking me questions. They were curious about my background, the work I do, ideas I had for his team, thoughts I had on leadership and culture. And when I finally got around to maybe asking a few questions, this coach was just more excited to share about the nonprofit that he had started that was taking his team and other sports teams on impact trips to the poorest parts of the world. Fortunately, after my keynote, the next day, I got to sit in on a talk that he was giving at a conference and just take like pages and pages of notes on the incredible things that he does within his program to build his culture. Now, that would be probably the end of that story for most leaders, but not for this leader, Graham Roxburgh. Graham's an absolute student of leadership and culture. He's a transformational leader who is always seeking to better himself in his program so that he can have a greater impact on the athletes. And Graham, he kept following up. He wanted to continue to talk more and asking more questions of me. And eventually we started a coaching relationship where I would support him and his team. And that led to a friendship and a special opportunity for me to go on an impact trip with his organization to Paraguay this last February. And that was a life-changing experience for me, for sure. So I'm excited to welcome the legendary college soccer coach, Graham Roxburgh, to the podcast as he reflects on his remarkable 25-year coaching career marked by 5 national championships. Graham is going to share his evolution as a coach, highlighting the profound influence of his early mentor and some pivotal moments in building a championship-winning program from the ground up. His leadership philosophy, it centers on really prioritizing people before performance, and that really shines through as we discuss the importance of vision, strategic recruitment, and fostering a holistic development environment where athletes can thrive as individuals and leaders. It's also worth mentioning that Graham's the founder and executive director of Team Up Canada. We're going to talk a lot about that in our second episode, but Team Up is a nonprofit charity that focuses on using sport to foster life-changing opportunities. Team Up uses the powerful tool of sport to come alongside local leaders, organizations, and community development projects to assist and enhance the potential for impact. They're all about double assisting, where they bring sports people, coaches, athletes, and resources like teams and coaching development to assist projects that are aimed at impacting the lives of kids, families, and communities. Currently, Team Up projects and initiatives are ongoing in Canada, Peru, Paraguay, Mexico, Uganda, and Malawi. You can learn more about them at teamup.world. And in part 2 of our conversation with Graham, we'll be discussing a lot more about Team Up, their impact, work with teams. And today's episode, though, it's really about how he has built the culture at Trinity Western University. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you unlock your leadership potential and create winning team environments. My name is JP Nurbin, and I'm joined today by my incredible co-host, Nate Sanderson. Our other co-host, Betsy Bedrick, sat this one out. Each week, we bring you practical tips and strategies to elevate your coaching. For more, you can explore our online courses and books at tocculture.com and betsybuderick.com. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at tocculture.com for weekly culture building insights. All right, Graham, I'm excited for this interview. It's been a long time in the making. I felt like I needed to do this after my trip with you and Team Up in Paraguay. And so we're finally getting around to recording this. And I want to spend the first half of our conversation today really kind of talking about your leadership, your coaching. Over the years, you've been coaching quite some time. You've got an incredible resume, 5 national championships in Canada for college women's soccer. But I'm curious, if you could kind of give our listeners not just an overview of maybe the many stops you've been in your coaching journey, but I think most people would be really interested in how you have evolved. Maybe some key moments. Think about the Graham when you first started coaching. Where were you? What type of coach were you? And then who are you today? I'd be curious about that.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, JP, for having me on the podcast. Really excited to kind of dive into a few different things. In terms of my coaching journey, I've been at Trinity Western University now, hard to believe, for 25 years. Doesn't always feel like 25 years, and then maybe the odd time it feels like more than 25 years. Um, but I've been involved in coaching at a variety of levels. Probably since I graduated from university. I went to school at a small private Christian university called Wheaton College, and just got connected to a couple club teams in the Chicago area and was asked to coach. And it was a great way for me to make a little bit of money and help kind of make it through college. And through some connections, got a chance to coach at decent club levels as I finished up my own university career. Then when we moved out to British Columbia, out on the west coast of Canada, coaching was never something that I thought I would do for a living. I was pretty excited about some other areas to pursue, but just the passion I've had for soccer and for the passion that I've had for influencing others. I remember in my own life, probably the most influential person for me outside of my family was my high school soccer coach. He played in what was then the English First Division, now called the Premier League. And, he was not only a coach, but a bit of a mentor and a really good friend. And even though he was probably 15 years older than me, he gave me a pretty good example of what it meant to build into the lives of younger athletes and encourage them and inspire them. And so it's funny, I used to say that I actually would hear his voice early on in my coaching career as I was coaching and as I started running drills and sessions and meeting with players. I could kind of hear Andy's voice. And so that's carried on through just in terms of my passion for investing my time into younger people. I got a chance to coach both at a good club level. I was injured for a year, and so they asked me to be kind of a player coach out in Vancouver. That was in men's amateur. And then at the same time, I got asked to be an assistant coach at Trinity Western, this small but going places university out in Vancouver. And it was a couple of years of being the men's assistant, and then all of a sudden they started a women's program. And just through being in the area and knowing a lot of the players and the people and the contacts in terms of recruiting, in their third season, I was asked to become their head coach. And I didn't know I would have a 25-year plus coaching career at the university level, but I was pretty taken early by the platform and the opportunity and the bigger goals that I have as coaching philosophy, that I just got a chance to build a program really from the ground up. And it's been really an incredible journey, full of highs and lows, but probably more highs than lows. And so I really have coached there. I've coached with other youth teams. I've had a really cool privilege twice to coach at what they call the FISU games. It's really the World University Games, and they're internationally renowned. And so I had the privilege of coaching Team Canada there a few times back about 15 years ago.
It's kind of interesting how we kind of fall into coaching, isn't it? Like same thing was, in college and helping kind of pay my way through college. And yet then instantly you're like myself, you just kind of fall in love with it. You had Andy as that mentor, and you talked about how his voice was kind of in the back of your head when you were starting off. What was some of that example? What were some of those things that he would have been saying in the back of your head that just really reinforced the type of coach that you wanted to be?
Well, I mean, he was a player that obviously played and experienced his sport, football, at the highest level. And so it was really neat for me to see a living example of somebody who could talk the game, who could communicate it through the passion and the energy that he exuded, whether it was on the sidelines or stepping into a drill. I always really appreciated that. He wasn't that much older than we were. Obviously, he was in his late 20s, early 30s when I was in high school. So he could demonstrate pretty much anything that he wanted us to see and experience and maybe touch and feel, if that makes sense. So, because I loved the game and played at a pretty decent level, I always felt like it was a part of my coaching that needed to really stay constant, and the ability to show and the ability to demonstrate, the ability to get on a field and give pictures. So I've really enjoyed that, but probably just the passion. I mean, he's got a northeastern English accent, so I'll always remember that distinct, challenge, humor, energy, passion. He exuded those things, and so probably I took on some of those characteristics when I was coaching. And I find it really funny, probably 15, 20, 25 years on now, I actually hear some of my former players, who've gone on to coach youth or who've stepped into training sessions, even as assistant coaches now in my program. And I hear phraseology in sometimes the same inflection that I would, maybe say something or challenge somebody, or maybe up the vocal energy in a session. And so it's kind of fun. It's come full circle. And now I'm kind of that person that goes, oh yeah, I've heard that before. I used that about 20 years ago. So yeah, those would be things that I took away from Andy. Andy was somebody I admired because he wasn't just passionate about the game, he was passionate about people. And I think he put both of those things together. And I think I probably picked up on quite a bit of that.
Graham, you talked about just embracing the challenge of kind of building a program really from the ground up, as the founding coach there. What was, thinking back to those first few seasons, like what were the most important first steps or maybe the first bricks that you put into the foundation of the program that you built today?
Yeah, really good question, Nate. I think, as I look back 25 years ago, I'd say there's probably two or three key things. One was, to bring a level of belief and vision as we started the program. The program had been going at, I would say, the equivalent of a very, very low level junior college level. And that's not meant to discredit junior colleges, but, we weren't playing against big universities. We were playing against local schools. And when I took over a couple of years into the program, they were getting thumped pretty big numbers. So it was probably just coming alongside the remnant of players that I inherited and giving them a picture of this is going to be really hard and we're going to work super, super hard. And then we're going to work hard as a coaching staff to start adding 1 and 2 and 3 players that could maybe enhance the overall skill level, the overall quality of performance. And so we literally turned over every stone in recruiting. We would go to every park, both locally and then sometimes, down I-5 into the States. Trinity is a unique university because it is an attractive place for athletes from the U.S. to come up. It's not far from, places like Seattle and Portland and beyond. So we scoured the lands in recruiting. So I would say the investment of ridiculous hard work, both with the girls that stayed and the girls that joined them, and then the ridiculous hard work of just selling a vision to a core group of recruits. So I always remember, there was one class, we were asked to transition the program from a college level team to the equivalent of a university team. So, in a US context, going from junior college to literally the NCAA, where we would have a vast array of teams that could play Div 1 or Div 2 or Div 3. And I always had a vision that said, I want to be not just a great program, I want to be amongst the elite. And possibly I want to be amongst the elite for private Christian universities, not just in Canada, but the US. So casting that vision and landing that first real class as we prepared for the university level were probably two of the biggest pillars that we put in place, kind of the foundation. And then sometimes I've said this, you got to be good to win, but you also have to have a little bit of luck. And I would say that was fairly true also on the recruiting side. Way back yonder, we landed 1 or 2 girls that could have gone to some legit universities. In fact, we're recruited by some legit universities. And for some reason, it aligned for them to come. And, I actually think that they made some great steps of courage to risk coming to a program that they could be seen as kind of the foundational building blocks as players. And so that was kind of the start. And it wasn't long after that more players started to catch the vision. And within 4 years of being into that new system, seems like a long time ago, we won our first national championship. We were known as the little school that could. If you have that image of that train trying to make it up the hill, that was kind of us. And it was pretty cool to be the underdog and to be this new kid on the block that, ruffled feathers and made some waves early on in our entrance to what they now call as U Sport. At the time, it was the CIS. So those were probably the things that I think were foundational. I'd maybe say I'd add one other thing. Because of the passion we have for, our tagline in our program is more than soccer. And I was able to sell that vision, and we were able to enact that vision. And maybe there's a segue down the road, JP, for some of the things we do with Team Up, but really the vision of, if you come to our program, not only will we give you an opportunity to one day make it to, whether it's the conference final or, the regional championship, or then go on and participate at nationals. We'll do things like go and serve in other communities. We'll serve overseas. We'll use sport as a tool and a vehicle to really invest into you and to your development as a person. And so probably all the mix of those, vision pieces, both on and off the field, was what probably helped us create the winning foundation that now has led to success over 25 years.
Yeah. So many places I want to go with this, but I'll just go with where you just kind of left off, which is just around this vision and this identity, and how you started to create and sell these players on this. A lot of coaches out there, they're taking over. I mean, if you take over a program, there's a 50% chance you're taking over a losing program, right? Or even if you're taking over a good program, you want to take it to great, right? So almost everyone is taking something that they want to elevate, make it great, and they're trying to recruit better players, more talented players. And here you have this vision of more than soccer, this identity of the little team that could, right? This little engine that could type of thing. You build into that identity. How do you, like, I still remember that my first time meeting you and having you took me out for lunch in Vancouver, and I was giving a keynote up in Vancouver, and I get it. So you're very humble. And so you're not going to, you weren't going to initially say this, but I'd be really curious. I know it was you that was selling them on these types of things, right? It was your passion, your energy. What were those conversations like with players in those first few years to help them see that vision and to start to take on that new identity?
Yeah, great question. Obviously I have the gift or the ability to communicate, and that's probably grown over the years. So early on, I probably was quite good at, both with players and parents, of painting a picture of, this is where we're at, but I think not too far down the road, this is where we could be. And so giving a player an illustration that, not only if she came to our university program would she get a great education, because Trinity is a pretty awesome place, but it would be more than that, and it would be an opportunity for that player to aspire to being a better soccer player, better athlete. And we would do everything we could to build into her as an athlete, as a person, as a leader. So maybe painting a picture of that holistic development was one of those key features of why players would come and what started that, the vision. I do think some of the service experiences played a part in that. And again, I've often said, don't come to Trinity just because my team goes on an overseas impact trip, every 2 or 3 years. That's not a good enough reason. But if you're coming for the reasons of education and sport development and wanted to be part of a winning culture and a really cool family that, was growing and going places, here's some value addeds that we were really intentional about adding to their experience. So selling the vision of the value addeds, whether it was locally or nationally or internationally. I think some of my other background in some of my previous roles with an organization called Athletes in Action meant I was pretty connected to a lot of different people, whether it's stateside in Canada or overseas. And so we all of a sudden, 3-4 years into our program, we were in England because of growing up in England, and we were playing Arsenal's reserves. And at that time, that was a big deal because not a lot of teams were traveling to different parts of the world. We'd go to South Africa and play their national team as they prepared for a major competition. So some of the network I had was able to sell the vision, and I had living proof that, my team can do these things. And we're bold enough to say, let's let's be the best we can be in Canada, but let's also make a difference in other parts of the world. So that probably was the vision piece. I remember, and sometimes you just got to risk and be bold. And I remember sitting in front of one young lady and her parents, and this kid was a special player. She went on to captain us to a couple national championships. But I remember sitting with her dad, and her dad was like, "You are going to win, aren't you?" And I was like, how do you answer this? So I said, well, here's my answer. I can't guarantee that we'll win a national championship, but I can guarantee you'll play for a national championship almost on an annual basis. And what did I mean by that? I didn't mean we'd make the final. I'm not that arrogant. But I meant that we would be in the conversation. And I think that was a picture. So one of my players in the very first national championship, a kid named Aaron Murray, dad was an awesome Irish guy. And, he was sold on the vision that I had, even though she could have gone to a lot of other reputable academic institutions. And his comment was, the fact that you believed that my daughter would have a chance to go play at a national stage, possibly for a national championship, was one of those things. And I remember reflecting, like, what happens if we never had done that? Was I lying to the guy, or did I let them down? It's probably this inner belief and this commitment to work and to believe that we were going to do it. Last comment for a long-winded answer. I'll never forget, Collins wrote the book From Good to Great. And he has this phrase, a big, hairy, audacious goal. My athletic director walked in probably 2 years into our whole department being in this new level where we were the smallest kid, lowest kid on the block. And he wrote up on the whiteboard, BHAG. And all of us were like, what is he talking about? And he put it up on the board. He said, within 10 years of us being in CIS, now U Sport, my big, hairy, audacious goal is that one of our teams would win a national championship in 10 years. I'm not arrogant, but I looked at my assistant coach in that meeting and said, let's do that in under 5. And we did it in 4. So, and again, not pride, but just a sense of we had a picture and we had a challenge and we were young and energetic and got after it.
Yeah, it's that belief. It's funny how you connect it back to good to great. A similar type school, Messiah College, Dave Brandt, what he built there, same thing, compelling vision, be the best place to play college soccer in America. And people kind of laughed at him or thought he was a bit crazy. And I'm sure some people thought you were a little bit crazy. Like, hey, we're going to go and we're going to compete with the biggest schools out there. And yeah, it's just how you sell in that. And it's just that level of belief that I think that really can be really inspiring for other people. So those are some things I really just pick up from you there. It's not arrogance, it's just belief in what you're capable of, and not just what you're capable of to compete, but also just the transformation that you're going to offer people, and that you're offering both those things. You're not offering one or the other. You're not falling into that tyranny of the or. You're going for both transformation and championships.
Yeah.
When you think about your leadership philosophy, and I know a lot of people really respect you, not just in the world of sports, but in business, people are keen to hear your thoughts on leadership. How would you really condense that down to really where you are? You've been on this journey, 25 years coaching at Trinity Western. It kind of makes me think, as you were talking back, that of like how that's evolved. And I think just coaches like yourself are very reflective. I think back to John Wooden, his pyramid of success, like coaches that spend a lot of time, they're able to really have and articulate philosophies, and I think inspire others. Yeah. How would you kind of share that with people out there, regardless of their sport, or maybe they're not even sport, they're in business?
Yeah. I'd probably, summarize it, JP, with the phrase, people before performance. And that doesn't mean performance doesn't matter. People before player. I know that in my recruiting conversations, I think one of the things that makes parents, particularly in this day and age where, they're a little bit more concerned, where's my kid going and what's the environment she's going to be in? What's the atmosphere, especially if she's going a different part of the country or a different part of the continent. I think I sometimes communicate this really well, and I believe it to the core, that as much as we'll help you experience what you have ambitions for as a player, and as much as we'll help you develop, as part of the pathway to your ambitions, we're going to care a whole lot more about who you are as a person. And I think that has been something that's been really important to me. And, not just through my own sporting experience, but just maybe even the environments I've been in. The value of cherishing and respecting and pouring into somebody so that they become all that they were created to be, I think is part of who we've wanted to always be. And so that's been part of my coaching philosophy. That doesn't mean we're going to sell you short on, player development. That doesn't mean we're going to have less ambitions in terms of winning in competition, but there has to be more. And our more is really, we believe that your life can be transformed. And some of that has a faith angle for me, obviously being at Trinity Western, but I don't want people to just hear that, oh, he's just really talking about, their lives being different because of faith. I'm really not actually just I'm talking about transformation in all types of areas of their life. We had a young kid on our program. She helped win 3 championships. Her name was Vanessa, and I'll never forget. It's one of the best and favorite stories for me of my coaching career. She represented Canada at U17. She was in the U20 mix for the national program. An unbelievable athlete, could have gone to it and actually had offers, but decided she wanted to stay in Vancouver. And because we were probably the elite program at the time, there's a few others now, but Vanessa chose Trinity Western. And she did not like to study. And I discovered pretty early on in her freshman year, this is going to be a battle to keep this kid in school. And so we just spent lots of time together. I got her some resources that the university provides. It was an uphill battle, and I thought we were going to lose her at the end of year 1, even though we had watched her help us win a championship. And I'll never forget sitting down with her. We actually went on a project to Paraguay with our team, with my other organization. And she came on that trip, and I think her heart was stirred of, wow, this is cool. I get to do some pretty unique things and care for a lot of underprivileged kids. And so I think that trip alone gave her a picture of, do I really want to leave this? But it was actually the conversation about, well, why aren't you enjoying studying? She just hadn't really discovered her passion yet. And it wasn't until we got her into an intro to psych class. And if you know Vanessa, you're like, that's a perfect fit. Because she's just such a people person. So it's kind of how do we spend time with her, build into her, get her resources so she could begin to discover who she was created to be. And I'll never forget, fast forward 5 years, watching Vanessa walk across the graduation platform. And you saw a young, dynamic, very, very intentional business leader. She went on into fashion design, and she now works as a regional director for Aritzia in the States. But here is an unbelievable athlete who we helped see transformation in just who she could become, because she was probably a week or 2 from dropping out of university. And I don't know what her story would have been, but I know what her story was because of our heart to see the hearts and lives transformed, whether that's academically in terms of leadership development. Obviously, there's a spiritual angle for us, but it's just having a picture that if you come into our program, we're going to see your life impacted so that you can go on and impact other people's lives.
Graham, I'm curious about this. When you think about recruiting, and obviously we have a lot of college coaches that listen, but even at the high school level, we're trying to sell our program. We're trying to, especially from a transformational perspective, sell this vision that we want to use the game. We want to use this team as an opportunity for kids to grow and to be transformed and to build their character. When you're looking and talking to athletes and trying to sell this vision to potential, players, are you finding players that are looking for that? Like they're sort of predisposed to, we want an experience that's bigger than just soccer, or maybe it's both. Are you finding players and then having to kind of convince them that, hey, there's even more here for you than just soccer? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And it's really you've painted the picture of our current reality, if I had to be honest. I would love to say everybody's looking for those value addeds that, I've articulated and that I know a school like Trinity can give you because of the small class size and because of the unique community atmosphere at the university. I don't think it's as true as maybe it was 20 years ago. That doesn't mean players are, less interested in that. But I think right now, because of the tremendous opportunity, particularly in soccer, but you've seen it in women's sport literally explode the last 5-7 years. I think a lot of the questions around athletes and recruits are, is this a place that will propel me to my real ultimate goal? And if it's not, I'm not even considering it. I do think some of that is just the space that our culture finds it ourselves in, where maybe some of the value addeds and the sense of serving and the sense of doing things beyond the sport maybe isn't as upfront and central as it used to be. And so I think that's a unique thing that we've got to explore. And it's probably one of the reasons why, when a player does come and I've sold the potential of winning, I've sold the potential of, becoming an elite player and propelling you on to your pathway. I think it's something that they actually discover and begin to appreciate and then take on way more meaning and value as they're in our program. So there are some players, like we had a young lady on our campus yesterday, recruit, who you could tell within 20 minutes, unbelievable cultural fit, good athlete. But I think she felt pretty excited about, hey, this is a small knit community where I can become somebody and I can thrive, and they're actually going to care about me. We've had some other recruits that stuff doesn't matter. It's what can you do for me as I pursue my athletic interests. So I think it's a little bit of both, Nate, if I had to be honest with you. And I think the coach's discernment is to figuring out what are those real key, important hot buttons for that particular person that you have to make sure not to oversell, because you want to be consistent in what you deliver, but that you can help highlight for them. I'll still always, because of who we are, talk about person or people over players. And I do think that has a small resonating influence in them. But I think the bigger picture is, once you come into our program, you are going to be surprised sometimes, or highly encouraged that, wow, this place has a little bit of a different philosophy of treating me and valuing me beyond the playing surface.
I'm want to get to team up and the impact trips because you've referenced that a bit. But before we get there, because I know that's such a big element of how you build culture, I'm curious. I would love for you to share maybe a few other ways that you build culture in the off season and in during the season, ways that you've been able to, essentially create a program that's highly competitive, high standards, where players really care about each other.
Yeah, thanks, JP. I've really enjoyed, working alongside you over the last year, and that's probably tweaked a few ideas for me, or given me a little bit of a different perspective of ways, particularly in this current generation of how culture can be not just created but co-owned or shared amongst the athletes. I think that's maybe something that has evolved in my coaching experience over the last probably 5 to 10 years. I don't think it's the case of me as the coach has a picture of what I want in our culture and therefore everybody must do. I think, when you recruit the right people, both as coaching staff and, the personnel around you that support the players, and then you recruit, for the most part, the right players, you just begin to grow the culture that you envision, or the culture that maybe is important to you, because you've recruited people with like-minded hearts and interests. I would say we do a lot of intentional things, particularly in preseason and then in the off season. And I'll give you for instance, obviously we're a soccer program. So first and foremost, we want to focus on how do we be a better team, whether that's in skill development, tactical development, athletic development. But I think the power of growing the culture so that players, one, feel valued, players, two, experience things that are beyond their comfort zone. And so we do a lot of service in preseason. And it sounds a little bit crazy, but we actually, in our first week, we actually serve and volunteer at a camp that is largely run for kids that have maybe a little less fortunate backgrounds, maybe underserved communities or underprivileged situations, or just kids that need a special week of love and care. And so we volunteer our time for that. And it's the first thing we do. And I know other teams do a lot of cool community service, so I'm not setting us up apart from that, but it is really important. And you'll hear pretty quickly from first years to fifth years where it's tiring because they're up early. And then after that, they got to run a session in the video session or in the weight room. But we kind of help our players see that it's intertwined with who we are, both in soccer performance and in serving in the community. So intentional service opportunities. We do a lot of really cool team building things, and that would be very similar to other teams where we'll be intentional and carve out time to just spend time growing as a team and finding ways to communicate and putting them in small groups so that they have a chance to have a say. In our off season, we have every Tuesday afternoon. We've changed the date because of our class schedules, but once a week we will have an intentional, what we call culture meeting. And instead of training outside or instead of doing something in the weight room, we take an hour and 15 minutes and we pick apart one area of our culture. It could be leadership development. It could be, again, another service or community involvement category. It could be, talking about our academics and setting goals. So it could be bringing in guest speakers. JP, you've come in and spent some time with us, which we've really valued. And it's always great to have some outside voices who have seen other teams in their culture development experiences. And so we'll invest a lot of intentional time into building our culture. We've had things. I'll give you an example. Just 2 weeks ago, it actually floored a recruit of ours. And we did it intentionally, but it just happened to work that she was in town. I got the group in our classroom. I said, girls, I do not want culture to ever feel like you're in class. And so probably every 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to do some type of, whether you call it a field trip or an extracurricular activity. We gave every group $25. It's not a lot of money in this day and age. And we said, you got an hour and a half. We'll see you back here in an hour and a half, and you're going to share a story or more stories. You're going to make us laugh through your stories, or you're going to make us cry through your stories. But how can you turn that $25 into the biggest blessing for other people? It's really fun to watch the small groups go out. I said, it's not a scavenger hunt. It's not a race. You got to drive carefully. You're allowed to leave campus, but let's be creative and either build bigger and better, meaning turn that $25 into something more, or figure out a way to be really resourceful and make that $25 stretch as far as it can to bless either somebody deeply or to bless a lot of people. And it was really unique. In fact, I had text messages from like 8 or 9 players at the end of that session, including the recruit, who said, that was one of the coolest things I've ever done with a team. And it's just simple, but it got them thinking about more than themselves and more than just being an athlete. And it got them thinking about, I want to be part of a family or community that does these special things for others. So those would be a few practical ones. I'm probably forgetting a lot, but we are very intentional about finding ways to enhance our culture. And obviously one of those is every couple of years, we do take what I call an impact trip. We were just in Calgary for 3 games, and I made a point that said, we're not going to Calgary to play. We're going to Calgary to learn and grow. And one of the ways we do that, so through a connection, we spent 3 hours at the food bank actually helping them unpack and sort and then shelve about, 20, 30 pallets of food that had been donated that they needed extra hands and feet to just make their lives a little bit easier. So we did that, and we heard the stories of how this is impacting people that are in less fortunate situations. So lots of cool ways for us to build into our athletes to be more than just athletes.
Yeah, and I remember hearing you speak when I was kind of in a breakout session at the conference I was speaking at, and just there is a lot of stuff you do. I even got this journal right here. It's the Spartan Way journal, and just how you had your players, journaling, reflecting after matches. One of the things I loved was you had players, you had selected 2 players to kind of do a review of the game and stand up in front of the whole team and talk about what went well, and kind of, it was just kind of an interesting way to do a post match review. I thought it was really impressive, but just, yeah, you could feel the connection within your team. A lot of amazing things that you do. So 2 things that really stuck out to me in today's episode, our first part with Graham. The first thing was, I want to be not just a great program, I want to be among the elite. The second thing was, we're going to care a whole lot more about you as a person. And that's something that's communicated in the recruitment process. And I think what really strikes me about that is Graham doesn't fall for the tyranny of the or. He believes you can both be elite and care about people. He's values-based. It's such a great encouragement for us as coaches, Now, I know you're going to love part 2 of our conversation with Graham. It was incredibly inspiring for myself and for Nate, and we're excited to share that with you. So be sure to subscribe to this weekly newsletter so you don't miss our next episode. Also, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. It helps us to find even more guests, get guests that we really desire to have on the podcast. That helps to have those good reviews. So please leave us a review and share the podcast.